Dusty, what's the one book you can always find in our car when we're on a trip?
Honestly, Mike, it is usually a Moon travel guide.
That's right. Moon is our favorite travel guidebook publisher because not only are they a source for ethical travel and the best ways to get away, but their books also are packed full of information on everything from sights to see, trails to hike, restaurants, and lodging, all from real authors who are local to the areas they're writing about.
That's right, and we're so excited that this year we are again partnering with Moon Travel Guides.
Ready to cross something off your travel bucket list in 2024?
Have a lot of great ideas for trips, but don't know how to get started or keep your itinerary organized?
Wherever your wanderings might take you or inspire you to go, Moon Travel has you covered.
Moon Travel is the travel guidebook publisher for ethical travel.
Don't spend months trying to craft the perfect getaway when you can do it all with Moon.
Whether you're headed abroad, planning to take to the open road, or want to wander the trails of a national park, make sure to pack a Moon travel guide with you.
Through the end of 2024, our listeners can get 20% off any Moon travel guide when they use the code GAZE24 at checkout.
That's amazing. And that is code GAZE24, GAZE24 for 20% off any Moon travel guide in Moon's entire library. And that is just for our listeners, and you cannot find that anywhere else.
Be sure to visit moon.com.
Head to our show notes and check it out and see Moon's entire collection of travel guidebooks. Hello and welcome to Trail Mix by Gaze at the National Parks, the podcast. I'm Dusty.
And I'm Mike. If you're joining us for the first time, Trail Mix is our short format episodes of our show. While our long format episodes explore one hiking trail in one national park, one park at a time, Trail Mix allows us to dive deeper into things we didn't get to cover in our long format episodes, including interviews, history, science, and environmental justice.
That's right. And this Trail Mix episode is all about the westward expansion that relates to Gateway Arch National Park. Okay, so what did they teach you about the West in school?
That it was there. I mean, that basically the Louisiana Purchase was the thing that opened the gateway to the West, and via Thomas Jefferson. And then because of that, Lewis and Clark explored the West, and then Manifest Destiny stepped in and did a number on this country and the inhabitants that once were native to it.
That's true.
And the gold rush and the population boom, Dust Bowl, etc.
Yeah. It sort of was like talked about in a way that was sort of like only highlighting and celebrating the work of, you know, white dudes, a white settler settling and creating violence, right? Mm-hmm. So,
in order to talk about the history of Gateway Arch, we have to step all the way back to westward expansion, which means colonialism. And we want to share something directly from the Gateway Arch Museum. Under the heading Tribal Lands, it says, quote, "Every square foot of land in the Americas acquired by European nations and the United States once belonged to Native Americans. As more and more people came to North America, land was taken by treaty, occupation, and warfare." End quote.
The Gateway Arch Museum, more so than other museums on various parts of the history of people of this land, also called the United States, does well at offering multiple perspectives and asking questions versus offering one narrative as a definitive truth, the way many history textbooks and other museums often function.
So today we're going to step through some of the events that led to an arch being built in the middle of St. Louis. We can't possibly cover everything, but we'll look at a number of things. Let's begin with Thomas Jefferson as the third president.
Thomas Jefferson made a choice that changed the history of the people of this land forever. It could be considered one of the biggest, most altering choices ever made by a president, as it reshaped the size and area of a country with one treaty or purchase.
In 1762, the colonies of the United States were expanding. The colonies had made it all the way to the Mississippi River. At this time, various European countries, mostly including England, France, and Spain, controlled much of the land. Again, mostly by treaty, occupation, and warfare. The area west of the Mississippi was known as the Louisiana Territory, and it contained about 828,000 square miles.
In 1762, the Louisiana Territory was controlled by Spain. In 1795, after the American Revolution, the U.S. and Spain signed the Pinckney Treaty, which allowed Americans to move goods and ships up the Mississippi River, which was proving quickly to be a valuable real estate for European countries who wanted to take land from others and expand their own.
In 1802, France took control of the Louisiana Territory, and Jefferson decided to move in. He sent James Monroe to join Robert Livingston in France to meet with Napoleon Bonaparte to try to purchase the Louisiana Territory. Given the fact that the French army was currently losing their lives to yellow fever while in Saint Dominique and the threat of war with England, Napoleon agreed to sell the Louisiana Territory for $15 million.
This is directly from the Office of the Historian at the U.S. Department of State. Quote, "When news of the sale reached the United States, the West was elated. President Jefferson, however, was in a quandary. He had always advocated strict adherence to the letter of the Constitution, yet there was no provision empowering him to purchase territory. Given the public support for the purchase and the obvious value of Louisiana to the future growth of the United States, however, Jefferson decided to ignore the legalistic interpretation of the Constitution and forego the passage of constitutional amendment to validate the purchase. This decision contributed to the principle of implied powers of the federal government." End quote. Okay, so Mike, I wanted to let you know that I decided to use money that you didn't give me to buy your neighbor's house for you.
Great.
I don't know where they're going to go, and I don't necessarily know what you're going to do with it, but you're welcome.
Thanks. And do you have that sort of money, Mike? No. Bum, 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 bum.
Correct.
Wow. Yeah, that is an interesting quandary.
The
and
presumption.
And also, I mean, just think about then the overreach that the federal government now had because of that.
Oh, yeah.
Like statute, essentially, that had been created because of this thing that Jefferson was like, nah, I don't really know what to do about it, so we're just going to roll with it.
We're just
doing it live.
Why not?
Yep.
Right, exactly.
Here was something we learned in the Gateway Arch Museum at the time of the Louisiana Purchase. The territory before was called New Spain and New France prior to the Louisiana Purchase. Under the Civil Code of law with France and Spain, a woman had the right to own, buy, and sell property, and speak with authorities on her own. Under American law, which took effect in 1804, all of those rights were immediately gone as women did not have any of those rights under American law at the time. Also, this meant that women could no longer bring property into a marriage that they had previously purchased. Isn't America great?
After the purchase of the Louisiana Territory, Thomas Jefferson organized an exploration of all the land that came with the territory. The two folks chosen to lead this exploration were Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. We're just going to put a pin on the name Meriwether Lewis. Because that's a drag queen waiting to happen if there ever was one. Yep, Mary Lewis and the News. I mean, there's a lot of places we could go with that. Apparently,
Meriwether Girls Lewis.
I mean, there's a lot, right? Apparently, Lewis was hired first. Then he brought on Clark. They met while frontiering, and then Lewis convinced Jefferson to let Clark co-lead the exploration, blah, 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 white men helping other white men explore stolen land. So anyway, they planned a 2-year expedition.
Jefferson's secret plan was that they would hopefully find a water pathway that would connect the Columbia Rivers and the Missouri Rivers. This would officially then connect the Pacific Ocean to the Mississippi River. This would create more capitalism for the area of land because it would allow for the ports along this river connection to receive and trade with commerce coming in from the Gulf of Mexico and with other countries east of the Atlantic Ocean. America is just a business.
I wrote in the script Sigh of Sadness, and that would be the album title if you ever made an album of music. It would just be called Sigh of Sadness, right? You'd produce it with Sufjan. The Lewis and Clark Trail is a 4,900-mile trail that passes through 16 states and over 60 current tribal nations. It technically begins in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and ends between the areas known as Oregon and Washington State at the Columbia River. The Lewis and Clark Trail is also a National Historic Trail under the care and maintenance of the National Park Service.
The group of people Lewis and Clark put together was called the Corps of Discovery. And although the Lewis and Clark Trail does start in Pittsburgh, lining up with the beginning of their expeditioning in 1803, their expedition of the Louisiana Territory did not come until a year later. In the summer of 1804, just outside of the city of St. Louis, Missouri, at Camp Wood, they launched this 2-year expedition.
Right now, is the part that gets left out of the history textbooks. Okay, so Lewis and Clark and the Corps of Discovery are about to head out into the Louisiana Territory to see what was there. The textbooks like to use words like wilderness to describe this land. See so many of our Trail Mix episodes where we break down the etymology of the word wilderness and how it was used as a tool for indigenous erasure. The truth is that the area of land purchased by Jefferson was fully inhabited by many, many people and families, literally hundreds of years of generations of families, all living on all of this land in the West, and Lewis and Clark are about to meet a lot of them as well. In fact, without the help and assistance of so many indigenous people and tribal nations, Lewis and Clark would have never survived, let alone complete their mission. In this summary of this expedition, we will highlight the indigenous people who played an active role in all of this. And since much of this piece of history is preserved in journals, has been thoroughly researched, and has tremendous great detail written down, we do encourage you to read further upon the relations between the indigenous people of the West and Lewis and Clark and their collaboration at this time.
For the first leg of the expedition, Lewis and Clark and the Corps of Discovery got onto their boats and made their way upstream on the Missouri River. From the article, The Living, Breathing Natives Who Made Lewis and Clark by Dayton Duncan, published on highcountrynews.org, quote, the Hidatstas gave them information about the uncertain, unmapped route that awaited them along the upper Missouri, describing mileposts they needed to watch for, down to the details of the sound of the Great Falls and a solitary eagle's nest in a cottonwood tree that would assure the explorers they were on the right track, end quote. Eventually, this led the Corps of Discovery to Fort Mondon.
Fort Mondon is located just north of the area known as Bismarck, North Dakota. Here they set up camp and a trading post. This is where they spent the winter and prepared to head further west to get to the Pacific Ocean. This area was named for the Mondon people who provided buffalo meat and corn to the Corps of Discovery in order to survive the winter. This is also where they met Sacagawea. And while her role in these events is often rewritten and at times over-romanticized, at this time she was a teenager. She was of the Shoshone people who were located much further west along this journey, and she joined the Corps of Discovery to be able to return to her homeland as well as provide guidance and resources. In the spring, the expedition made its way to the area known as Montana, near what is currently referred to as Three Forks, by following the Jefferson River, which was, and we say this in quotes, named by Lewis and Clark, and we'll give you one guess for who inspired the name.
Cher.
Yeah, Cher.
Yeah.
That's it. Cher inspired that name.
This leg of the journey brought them to the Shoshone tribe. One problem that was presented to the Corps of Discovery was getting over the Bitterroot Mountains. The Shoshone were experts in traversing this mountain range, and the only way to do it was by horse. Returning Sacagawea to the Shoshone, and her request to the Shoshone allowed the Corps of Discovery to use Shoshone and Salish horses for the next leg of the journey.
Upon getting around the Bitterroot Mountains, the Corps of Discovery made their way to the mouth of the Columbia River in canoe-like boats. From Dayton, quote, without the salmon and camas roots offered freely by the Nez Perces, they would not have recovered from near starvation after emerging from the mountains. The tribes of the arid Columbia Plateau provided them with much-needed food on the expedition's way out and back. More food and essential information also came from the Chinooks and the Clatsops along the Pacific coast.
Due to the help of many indigenous tribes, the Corps of Discovery were able to make their way back to St. Louis, Missouri with a completed expedition and completed maps of the routes. This began and set a pathway for more white settlers to head west.
From Duncan, quote, the two captains understood from the start how crucial Native Americans were to their success. Lewis spent $559.50, nearly 1/4 of the expedition's entire congressional appropriation, on presents for the natives. 8 brass kettles, 130 rolls of tobacco, 500 brooches, 12 dozen pocket mirrors, 4,600 sewing needles, 33 pounds of tiny colored beads, silk ribbons, and yards of bright colored cloth, tomahawks that doubled as pipes, and much more. This doesn't even count the boxes of Jefferson peace medals provided at no charge by the United States Mint, end quote.
While there is only one reported moment of violence between the Corps of Discovery and one indigenous tribe, that being the attack on the Blackfeet, there were no other recorded incidents of violence. However, the maps that were drawn and the paths that were recorded were used by settlers for years after, leading to many other incidents of violence between white settlers and indigenous people: genocide, displacement, and the transformation of flourishing forests and grasslands into cityscapes and titans of industry.
The sources for today's episode include the U.S. Department of State, the Office of the Historian, the National Park Service, the National Archives, and the article The Living, Breathing Natives Who Made Lewis and Clark by Dayton Duncan, published on highcountrynews.org. This has been Trail Mix by Gaze at the National Parks, the podcast, and we're here to remind you to hike early and hike often, and that adventure is always out there.
Gaze at the National Parks was created and is hosted by us, Dustin Ballard, and Michael Ryan.
To see images from this episode, follow our Instagram at Gaze at the National Parks. To contact us, email us at gazeatthenationalparks@gmail.com. And to find out more about the parks visited on this show, visit our website, gazeatthenationalparks.com. And that's Gaze, G-A-Z-E.
All original artwork featured on Instagram and on our website is by me, Michael Ryan.
All original music was written and performed by Dave Seaman and Mariella Klinger, with Sean Sklios on guitar. Our music producer is Skylar Fortgang. This episode was edited by me, Dustin Ballard.
We would also like to acknowledge that while recording this episode that we are on the traditional and stolen lands of the Lenape people, also known as Middlesex County, New Jersey.